weapon will prosper. No enemy triumph. He will not overcome. He can't scale these walls. Injustice will not win. Hell's gates will not prevail. Not on my time. Not on my watch. I am a watchman, and I take my place. As I wait, I will keep the faith. 'Cause I am a watchman, and I stand my ground. But if I never see it, I will stay the course. I will run the race, I will fight the fight, and I will keep the faith. I keep my eyes fixed on you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Zach Arskadden coming to you solo from North Carolina today as our team is making their way back to the United States from Japan. And today we want to echo a lot of what has been prophesied and then also what has been notified via natural intelligence, natural governments here in the United States and around the world, based off of some events happening, obviously, within the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, and then now Israel and Hezbollah in the north in Lebanon. And it plays a key feature of why it's important for us to be very diligent and aware of our surroundings in this time and the season, and understanding as not only natural citizens, but as citizens and ambassadors for heaven, more specifically, of how we need to pray, making sure that we can endure and stand the test of time and not be worn down, as Daniel 7:25 talks about in the dream given to him, Daniel, at the time. But first, before we dive into everything, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. Just want to remind everyone, if you could, like, share, subscribe. This helps us spread our grow our channel, spread our message, because we want to help those who are looking for answers, looking for ways to navigate this season, as it not only economically but wartime can be somewhat stressful if there's no hope. And we want to try our best of giving our portion and providing an avenue of where they can seek the Lord and have some hope in this season with all that's going on in the world, from both economic and spiritual and natural as well. So if you could, leaving a comment, not only here on this episode and this live stream, but also on any podcast you listen to from us, on our YouTube channels and everything there. So just wanted to start reminding you guys of that. Also, pray for our team as they fly back today. They hopefully land sometime tomorrow, as it's a very long flight from Tokyo back to the States. So they'll be in desperate need of prayers as they fly over. And two other things that we'll go ahead and dive into the prayer focus for today is everyone knows we have a school of ministry, and right now our registration is open for next year. And we'll be putting out more information on this. If you want to share this with anybody, young, old, in Shreveport or around the local area, or somebody who's considering maybe coming for a year to go to Olive School of Ministry, it's a day class, and you can see the whole curriculum here, some videos we have and testimonials, as we're producing more videos now. olivesm.org is where they can find that, and they can go there, apply, and start the process. It takes a while, so they want to go ahead and apply, as the deadline will be coming up here at the end of June. So they'll need to be sure to apply sooner rather than later. And then the last housekeeping item is for anyone in need or wanting a prophetic word who's more of our online audience, you guys here, is why we're kind of keeping it more to online rather than local. What we do is we have an online prophetic flex. We spend about 10 minutes having our prophetic team share an encouraging word that they hear from the Lord from you. Really focusing on the Psalms 139:16, where David cries out to the Lord and talks about how the Lord knew about him before he was even in his mother's womb, and he was written about him. So it's kind of having that, spending that time of Lord personal with our prophetic teams, giving them practice and helping encourage you. We have 10 spots left. You can go to our website, christiancentershreveport.com. I'll put the link below for this registration. Sign up. It'll be through Zoom, and you can sign up for the time that best fits your schedule. So I'll leave that here as well for you guys to be able to sign up for that. 10 spots left, so we're very limited on our spots there. Now, with all that being said, I want to dive back into the news here and really focus in on our prayer focus for today. So, I want to take a step back and obviously seeing where some things are at with Israel and Hamas. And then I want to take a further step back into a dream that Chris Reed had. Now, last week we talked about, Randy and I talked about really focusing on 1968 and really a timeline of the 60s and what are some similarities, what aren't. Hopefully, you guys were able to catch that. I know the internet was kind of rough there. But hopefully you caught the grasp of it. And I know a lot of you guys have history and understanding of that, probably better than I do. So you'll understand more. Hopefully that was just a reminder of where we were at and something that can really help focus our prayer and understanding. Okay, there's a sense of heightened um heightened warning right now. And Chris Reed, Pastor Tim, Chuck Pierce, Dutch, Clay, everybody who's listening to the Lord and hearing from the Lord, whether they've been accurate in the past or inaccurate in the past, there's something going on right now where the Lord is sending off warning signals. Obviously, with what's happening in Israel, it's very easy to see what those warning signals might possibly be. So, what we see is in the natural. I want to touch on this and then we'll dive into the prophetic that I really want to hit on, and it'll help us with our prayer focus here towards the end. Is in the natural today, this recently just happened within the last hour, is the UN Security Council approved a resolution demanding Israel and Hamas come to a ceasefire till after the Ramadan of April 9th. Netanyahu had warned that if the United States did not veto this and vote no, that he would cancel the Israeli delegation that would come to the United States and sit down and talk with the Biden administration about one, the ceasefire, but then two, the invasion of Rafah, which is the key stronghold right now left in Gaza for Hamas, that Israel is been planning and wanting to go after, been sending warnings, doing everything they did before they went in to other areas in northern Gaza, dropping leaflets telling them you need to leave, you need to get out. And obviously the people, whether they're forced to stay, are not leaving, or they're intentionally not leaving, are not leaving. And Israel's having to go in and be very careful how they navigate this um, situation, both internationally and then within the land of Israel and Gaza as well. So you see this vote, and then immediately after that, I want to pull this article up where we see Hamas starting to refire rockets back into Israel, into the Ashdod region more specifically, that they haven't fired at in more than 2 months. Several of the rockets, two of the rockets were intercepted. Others landed in open areas that caused no damage. So it's a good thing there. But this is Hamas's response to a ceasefire and a resolution from the UN Security Council that ultimately helps them. Like, this is their response. And historically, if you've ever paid attention to the Israel Arab conflict, is whenever there's a negotiation for peace, that Israel was willing to give up upwards of 800 No, 700. Some reports said 800. The Jerusalem Post is reporting 800 prisoners for 40 of the hostages that they don't, one, don't know their names, and two, don't know that they're alive. Like, this is what Israel was willing to give up. And the response from all of this is not, yes, we'll agree to this deal from Hamas. It is, yeah, we're going to shoot rockets back at you. That is what in business is called bad faith negotiating. And we're seeing it play out on the global scale when it comes to this. And the US UN ambassador, Linda Greenfield, Linda Thomas Greenfield, basically was saying that, look, we're getting closer to an immediate ceasefire with the release of all the hostages, but we're not there yet. Now, let's be clear, a ceasefire would have come about months ago if Hamas had been willing to release hostages months ago. Well, let's go back to October the 6th, where there was a ceasefire. And then what changed on October 7th? I think we all know. So this is where the US is playing these games. And obviously, being an election year, you have the Biden administration kind of had tiptoe around this subject to stand with its Israeli Democratic supporters, and then also with its non Israeli Democratic supporters as they head into the election. So we see these things playing out. And I'm laying all this out so we're aware of the times and seasons that we're in, number one, because this just happened today, not so recently. Now, I want to take a step back from this weekend to, and this will lead into the prophetic dream that I want to get to. So I don't know if you guys saw this, but there was an unfortunate terrorist attack in a theater in Russia. The reports coming out of Russia are that 133 people were killed, 140 were injured, plus more burned. Some who inhaled smoke. The theater is destroyed. Over the weekend, there was reports of 11 terrorists who were arrested. Now the reports coming out of there are only four. So obviously, it's kind of hard to assess how many people really were involved. Obviously, Russia, as you see there, Putin is blaming Ukraine for the open borders, and then ultimately kind of hints at, look, nobody's safe to a degree. You got to kind of be careful, and it's very, very troubling to see that. And at the same time, you have the possibility that Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and a coalition were going to come over. There were reports that Speaker Mike Johnson was going to invite him to speak before Congress, which he has the authority to do. That is no longer on the table there. So we're seeing a major divide and major conflict coming out around this U.S. decision to not veto the UN Security Council that now demands a ceasefire from Israel. Now, that doesn't mean that it will happen. That just means this is what the UN strongly, strongly suggests. And meanwhile, Russia and China are on this board, and they vetoed a bill or a resolution last week that the United States had put forward. So it's really interesting to see the U.S. not have a backbone in this situation, and it's a cause for concern in the fact of some are calling what Europeans are calling for the ceasefire, and those who are kind of push for the ceasefire as a reward for terrorism. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, yet to be determined. Hopefully, it doesn't play out that way, but it's a very, very strong warning signal to see here. And the major push from the Biden administration for this ceasefire is that if if Israel and the IDF were to go into Rafah, it would cause what they consider a humanitarian crisis, where they say upwards of 32,000 people have died within the war. Again, we talked about that a couple weeks ago. That's kind of hard to calculate because, one, you can't trust what's coming out of the numbers coming out from Hamas because they continue to be debunked from their own sources after time. And then also is like Israel's not seeing that when they go into these countries of the death toll, the bodies, they're not there as they take over. There are some, but there are not as many as they say. And then the U.S. Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez, excuse me, said that if Israel were to go in, the humanitarian crisis that it would create would be upwards of more than 1 million. Again, that's hard to know, but all reports are that it is not true coming out of Israel. If they were to go in, some have left, some are staying. In there's safe regions for them to go to be protected from the incoming fighting that is more than likely going to happen. But also the humanitarian crisis is that Hamas has been starving the people, robbing them, taking the humanitarian aid that's come to them to fund themselves. And now you're seeing, as I showed earlier, that they're firing now, starting to they feel like they're at a point of strength and they're firing rockets back into Israel. Israel also over this last week took over another hospital, found more weapons, found more leaders within the within Hamas there. We're able to capture them, and their whole focus is to go after taking out and ending Hamas, which they need to for their national security. So, with all this being set up, I want to then focus on this dream from Chris Reed. It's a different dream than the one last week that goes back to October 2023. And the reason I want to pull October 8th, 2023, he put it out on his newsletter last week, and I want to go through a little portion of it and a huge portion of it so that we understand where we can have hope in this season and what we can do both in the natural and as prayer warriors, intercessors in this season, in this election year, because this all accumulates to what we're seeing here in the United States. The southern border being open, numerous peoples who are on the terrorist watch list coming across that are caught, unknowns, getting through. So we don't know how many are actually getting through. And this dream kind of highlights prophetically what could possibly happen if certain scenarios were to play out. And one of the taglines he says there that he saw in the dream, in somewhere he was able to read it in the dream, he saw, "So goes Israel, so goes America." So that's a clear warning there. Um, and the huge comparison that he talks about, I'll pull it up here so we can all read it. I'll put the Let me put the link to this here right now in the comment sections so you guys can go back and read it for yourselves, share it if you need to. Just let people know, be aware of what the dream is, one, when he had it, and then how we can pray and what's at focus here. Because we hint at this a lot. Let me blow this up as well. We hint at this a lot, and so we want to make sure that you guys are fully aware of what we're talking about. We just want to talk about it and hint at it, but that you guys are fully aware. So let me pull this on the screen here. I want to go through this a little bit. Um, so he had the dream that he referenced October 8th, 2023, where he saw a map of the United States. And when he saw the southern border, he saw thousands of trained terrorists from Middle Eastern countries peppered among the 6 million plus illegal immigrants, which that's verifiable. They're NBC, CNN, everybody's reporting it. If you've watched anything from C-SPAN, from Congress, of the litany of military and government officials, war administration's response, communications, and then that's where he says, "So goes Israel, so goes America." Now, where he says here, he says this is a clear connection between and comparison between October 7th, the terrorist attacks on Israel, and the risk America now faces. So we've been warned. So what are we going to do about it as prayer warriors? One, and then praying. This is where we need to pray for our leaders, whether we disagree with them or not, or agree with them. They're still in charge of our country. They're still in charge of our southern border. And yes, Texas is doing some things to help that. There are others who are helping, but at the end of the day, it's like not only do we want to pray for that, but we want to pray for those elsewhere who are now affected by it. The mayor of New York, and if not only the leaders, but it's an election year, so the power of the vote is going to be even more important. And I'll get to that here in a second, where we need to stand up and let our voices be heard at this time where we can. Now, excuse me. So in this warning dream, we're seeing this play out here that Chris is talking about. He says the same thing happened in the warning dream I was given about the terrorists crossing in the U.S. southern border. They will able to enter covertly because of failures in U.S. intelligence and security. And that's the same thing that happened in Israel. That's why October 7th, excuse me, was able to happen in Israel. There were laxes in security from the previous administration before Netanyahu got back in office, and it led up to that. And it took over a year. They planned it for 2 years from the terrorists who have been captured. They said they've been planning it for 2 years because they saw their window of opportunity and they took it. And then he goes on into the dream, talks about he saw where they came from the Middle East, from the Stan countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, and it was brought about from the American withdrawal uh, from Afghanistan. So everything's starting to link up here. And if we go back to what we talked about last week, the Bobby Kennedy assassination came from a Palestinian who was upset about Bobby Kennedy's stance on then Israel Palestine. And so we're seeing some things pop up. Could it be something like that? His other dream last week talked about a warning of an assassination attempt to pray against. So we want to continue to pray with that and this. So it's all accumulating here as we're seeing coming together. And however, he talks about these foreign nationals. We're not the only foreign nationals warned in the dream. They're also working in coordination with Mexican cartels, which we know that's been happening for years. Uh, Border Patrol has been talking about that. DHS has been talking about that. And this is the key point. Key point. If you live in these states, if you live in these regions of the country, something to pay very close attention to. He said next he saw at least 12 dormant terrorist cells on the United States map. Initially, these terrorists were mostly taking shelter in sanctuary cities and were given contacts to connect with upon arrival in these areas. They could establish themselves and work in communities where they now lived. They were promised from command that their families would be financially rewarded, even promised their afterlife, which is a key tenet of their faith, what they believe. For compliance and doing this, among the 12 sleeper terrorist cells, he remembered a few geographical locations where they were most prevalent. One, Michigan. We've obviously seen that. Minnesota, Arizona, Texas, the Carolinas, and the Northeast, including the cities of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. So these are very pinpoint strategic areas to pray for, pinpoint regions, obviously, Texas being on the border, but North and South Carolina. He says the Carolinas. Obviously, he's located in the Carolinas, as I myself am located in the Carolinas. So I take this warning very seriously in my natural understanding, but in my prayer as well. He also talks about here, and this is the key focus here of what their plan is ultimately to control the U.S. Government's actions to dictate our foreign policy, which you can see them starting to do through the Biden administration, defense postures on the open border, eh, in elsewhere throughout the world, and say Afghanistan, etc. A response to the world events by blackmailing U.S. government with the threats such as, if you do not do this in a particular situation, we'll coordinate and detonate bombs simultaneously. Or if the government doesn't comply with our demands or wishes, we'll respond with terrorist acts. Some of the demands of these terrorists, he says, that he was shown in the dream were, one, to not for the U.S. not to use military to attack or fight against the cause of jihad. Two, to continue to send funds to Iran and other terrorist states to support them in the name of foreign aid. And then three, the red line of, if they didn't do this, that they supposedly had explicit images and pictures of U.S. politicians in every branch of government, which they may threaten to use if they don't adhere to what they're saying. Explosives were the last step. And so I want to mass shootings, knife fightings, taking hostages for ransom. Rick Joyner has also had similar warnings about this, going back years, and the possibility of a detonation happening across the U.S. with smoke clouds, rubble, and destruction and disaster all over the map. And we have to remember, as he says it here in Ephesians 6, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this age, and against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand in the evil day, and having done all to stand. And so, closing, he woke up knowing that if prayer and action are taken now, we can stop this. So that's the hope that this can be prevented. Doesn't mean that it'll happen overnight. Doesn't mean that there won't be um, some necessary force that is needed in response to some of these. There's also talks of blackouts and things of that nature. I mean, the warnings about the U.S. Energy sect uh, being very vulnerable, which we've seen, and we want to take this very, very, very seriously in this season. And he says we need to watch, listen, and be alert. Situational awareness and self defense training, so as not to be perceived as soft targets. Um, it would be wise, like I'm advising my wife to not go places without me or without a group of people. Being alone, being vulnerable can be kind of a strategic thing. And then lastly, more importantly, we need to pray because prayer makes a difference. And after all, it's not just one group of people wanting to harm another. It's about spiritual darkness. And that's where he leads into Ephesians 6. So I say all that to say, I know it's very meaty. I know it can be very hard to say, but there is hope through it all. We've seen it. There's the prayers and prophetic and declarations from Dutch, Clay, Chuck that, America will be saved. If you've been watching to anything Martin Murillo's been doing, is very hope filled of souls. And that's the most important thing we focus on. We should focus on as believers of making disciples of the nations, of the souls of those in America. Jeremiah Johnson has seen dreams of the desolation and the spiritualness within America, and so that ultimately that's our focus. And whether no matter denomination, no matter where we agree or disagree, is hopefully that's the commonality we can come together on. Is we may have major differences about minor things, but we need to make sure we're not letting those minor differences affect our major command from the Lord. Number one, to love each other and be a representative, and that others, non believers, will know that we're followers of Christ through our love, but also to make disciples of the nations and to bring hope to those who have no hope or who have lost hope, who need to be reminded of that in this season. And that's why we want to be here standing on the wall, praying in agreement with Chris here and others who have seen and heard from the Lord on this issue and other issues like this of the warnings that have been released. If you also listen to our podcast today, we released a dream that Pastor Tim had about a similar situation and some things we can do. And this leads me to my point of the importance of us standing in this year being an election year. If we saw anything from 2020, whether no matter how we feel about the results, is your voice matters. And what we've seen not only in 2020 but 2016 and elections before that is that Christians, one, are barely registered to vote. So getting registered to vote is very key. But then also going out and voting for biblical moral values. Um, if that were to have happened in 2020, no matter what was done nefariously through the ballot harvesting, which was somewhat legal, through the mail out ballotings, which was legal, whether we like it or not, that whatever those actions would have caused, if Christians would have voted, it would have over surmounted and been so much more. Dutch talks about this a lot. Is it would have been so much more that they would have not been able to overcome. And you see this in certain areas of the country where you had 106% of votes counted of the whole population, meaning that more people voted in a county than actually lived in a county. The big claim from Democrats is that there is no voter fraud, so why do we even worry about that? Let's just be lax on and not have voter ID laws and sent out mail out ballotings to try to help as many people get access to the voting booth as possible, which is just blatantly false. We see that Democrats are starting to awake to that. If you're from Louisiana, you understand that's also not true just by our history of politics. And so it's very key that we understand our voice matters. Dietrich Bonhoeffer talked about is like if you're silent in the face of these threats, then you're giving into the tactics. So yeah, a lot of dead people voted in Louisiana before, and Edwin Edwards also won a lot of elections in Mexico uh, because Louisiana sold their uh, vote counting machines to Mexico, and somehow every election was rigged to come back Edward Edwards. But that's besides the point. So we're just remind you of that, the hope here in this situation, and praying and standing as believers all over the United States, as we see here from you guys. We have SoCal, we have South Louisiana, Mansfield, Thibodaux, Texas, Washington State, Minnesota. uh, We have so much. We've had someone from South Africa, North Cal, Wyoming here, and it's great to see you guys on from Cincinnati, Illinois, and others as well. Those are just the ones I'm seeing. And it's a very important time to be diligent in this season as we're coming up, not only on the presidential election, but it's even more important the lower elections. We have Shreveport as well, that we understand what offices are up for a vote, what resolutions are up. Um, Obviously, that's going to depend upon where you live. You can go to your local um, voting websites, registration websites, they'll have the list of all that listed out. Most states have a family values is the best way to look at it when you search for it, of knowing how candidates stand, giving a report card. Um, a lot of it not more at a city level, but a lot of it at a state level. There are, your local political groups that can help inform you of where some candidates stand, whether it be school board, um, certain councils, whatever it may be, to know how to be aware of how to vote. And it's a time to become informed in this season, so that when November comes, okay, this is who we're going for, this is what we've prayed for, this is what we're praying against, this is what we're standing for, to come into alignment and be an ambassador for Christ in this nation. And obviously, some people disagree with that. And the question you have to ask back is, if we're not going to stand for Christian moral values, then what values are we standing for? What values are we going to allow take effect in this nation? We're going to allow hedonistic, secular worldviews? That's a huge question we have to ask ourselves: is, are we willing to sacrifice future generations for the appeasement of our neighbors, rather than standing up in love and truth, and standing on the whole word in spirit and in truth, and being an example for Christ? And in America, we have that ability. In other nations, they don't. It's been fought for. Others have bled and died for it. And so it's an honor to honor them, honor our fathers, for the sacrifices that they've made, whether we agreed or disagreed with them, in order to let freedom continue to take a stand. And you're seeing that being quelched right now via social media, being other outlets. So a huge thing would be, don't rely on those social media websites to get informed. Go directly to news sites. Go directly to personal websites of people. Substack's a great one. Twitter is becoming a great one. It's notorious for being a waste of time, and it can be. But just read your article, move on. It's a time to stay diligent, because, as Chris talked about, our battle is not in flesh and blood, but we do want to be aware of the times and seasons, like the sons of Issachar, and aware of our surroundings, so that we don't fall prey to the tactics to be worn down, as 720 Daniel 7:25 talks about, of the schemes from the enemy. So I want to just highlight that. I know it was real meaty. Hopefully you guys took some hope from that. And I put the link for Chris Reed's newsletter from last week, talking about this dream, about the potential for a terrorist attack, and how we need to pray against it on American soil. I mean, Gloria Zion has a lot of material out right now that they're praying on, with their tour of the states and praying. everywhere. I know a lot of states intercessory groups are rising up and praying right now. I think this is great, and hopefully, this can touch the hearts and minds of, say, those younger in the faith who need hope, need sense of direction, young families, young people struggling economically can take a step back and reflect on their one relationship with God and their soul salvation and their soul and where they're at with the Lord, and keep that eternal focus and perspective and understanding the Lord can guide them through this, can give them hope through whatever the situation may be. Somebody put in here, there's an app called Ballotpedia that gives you bio for candidates. That can be good. I somewhat like it's a good place to start, but ultimately, finding something more local helps out. And going to the best thing to do, and I'll close with this. Uh, I'll say this and I'll close. Is the best thing to do is go see what go see your county, your parish, depending on what state you live in, what elections are up, and then go to the candidate's website if they have a website, or finding someone who does. Because even Ballotpedia doesn't have. They have a lot, but they don't have everything. And so if they don't have something, the next best source is figuring out what elections are, and then going to the candidate's website or Most of them, if they don't have a website, they'll have a Facebook group, page that you can go and see some things. So it's very. If you have questions, just send them to pip@christiancentershreveport.com, and we can help you find some things in your area through our team. And so, with all that being said, again, I want to close. Hopefully, we can give you guys hope through this season. You guys are aware and understanding that that key phrase that he had in that dream. I wrote it down because it was so important. So goes Israel, so goes America. Something we want to be warned about. And it's not just about the attack; it's about what led up to the attack. What is a situation that we can be aware of, and all the chaos and things that we're seeing politically, whether we again agree with this administration or don't. We want to pray with these leaders. We want to pray with our local leaders, pray for them and their families to be able to have peace. Because if pressure's on them, if the dream is correct, then there are outside influences on them and their families to be able to make sure that they're doing things. Let's say they have biblical or could possibly stand for biblical moral values, but because of these outside influences of forcing them to do something that they wouldn't rather do, maybe they make wrong decisions. Um, I did. I put a link. Somebody's asking to put the dream. I did, Danielle. It's if you go back in the chat, it's in. I put the link there from Morningstar. It says dream from October 8th. So you can go read it or go back and watch it. I go through in detail here, but I want to close out on that, kind of keep it short today. Tomorrow, again, we'll have our noon prayer for those in Shreveport uh, at Christian Center in our Eastern Auditorium on the campus. Overflow will be open, get some coffee, just enjoy a time of prayer and worship and intercession for the local region and internationally, as well as our team comes back from Japan and they're making their way back. And we'll get back on a regular schedule. I'll have Pastor Tim on here next week, talk a little bit about his travels there, and then also what the Lord has been laying on his heart prophetically while he was over there, as he's had some several dreams. So go back and watch this if you missed it. Please like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, and listen to our podcast today. That it'll really go alongside of this. So we just want to surround this topic and making sure the watchmen have arisen and aren't asleep in this season, as it's a time to be awake, and extreme time for diligence in this season, and relying upon the Holy Spirit of how to navigate this. As even Chris Reed's dream from last week, early on in March, tells, he's like, he had it, but he's looking for the correct interpretation. And what these dreams are is they're an invitation. John teaches this a lot. They're an invitation from the Lord to start a conversation, and to see where we can pray against, and maybe even take action. So blessings each and every one of you. We'll be back tomorrow for our online noon prayer, and we'll continue to stand and pray not only for this nation, um, but for Israel as well, and for believers around the world to take the stand and to endure against the schemes of the enemy in the days ahead. Blessings, and I'll see you guys next week. But we'll be back tomorrow. Have a good one.